Good evening and welcome to RFL. I'm Richard French. Tonight we wrap up a week where we saw something unusual. Former police officer convicted of murder for something he did while on the job. Of course, I'm talking about Derek Chauvin, who's now in jail awaiting sentencing over the killing of George Floyd. We've also seen several high-profile shootings where people of color died at the hands of police. Those incidents were followed by the usual response, including leaps to judgment, accusations, and certainly overdue calls for reform. And that is the subject of tonight's Where I Stand commentary. Police. The jury got it right in Minneapolis this week, and frankly, it wasn't or shouldn't have been a close call. Anyone who argues what Derek Chauvin did was in the area code of acceptable policing, they're an apologist for enforcement that is, in my view, immoral and antithetical to the idea of justice. The fact that that last statement is even for some up for debate, it confirms that we have still got a long ways to go. That said, the apologists for police abuse are not the only voices this week that have trafficked in fiction, inflamed tensions, and in my view, worked against the national interest. Now, similar to the daily drumbeat of mass shootings in this country, since the advent of police body cams and the ubiquitous civilian cell phones, we are confronted with tragic images of people, more often than not of color, dying at the hands of police. Every incident, it is a tragedy. Everyone leaving a family with a hole that will never be filled. However, every incident is not the same. Derek Chauvin killed George Floyd. It was 9.5 minutes of unnecessary brutality in broad daylight where no threat remained and onlookers begged for compassion. The authority, empowered with our safety, it was the most reckless on the scene. It was, in short, murder. That is not what happened 10 miles away in Brooklyn Park, where an officer made a fatal error drawing her pistol instead of her taser after he resisted arrest. It resulted in 20-year-old Durante Wright's death. Now, that officer must pay the price of her error, probably with jail time. But I ask you, were her actions the same cold-blooded as murder as we saw in Minneapolis earlier? In Chicago, also this week, another life lost too soon. Adam Toledo, only 13, suffered a fatal gunshot at the hands of an officer. This happened at 2:30 in the morning, police responding to a citizen's 911 calls of gunshots. 2.5 minutes later, the cops responded on scene, pursuing two males carrying guns. And when Adam emerged from that alley and he raised his weaponless arms, in that split second, the officer fired. Now tell me, is that the same thing as what happened to George Floyd? And in Columbus, also this week, we saw an arriving officer responding again to calls of a knife-wielding assailant. And when he arrived, 16-year-old Makia Bryant was lunging at another teen with a blade when the officer fired, taking her life. Again, I ask you, was his split-second decision and the contributing factors the same as what Derek Chauvin's did? Now, none of these lost lives are inconsequential. But to me, to lump their final moments at what surrounded those tragic split-second decisions, that is as irresponsible as it is dangerous. We have an opportunity in this country right now to tackle long overdue police reform, better training, revised use of force guidelines, more transparency, reduced qualified immunity, reallocating funds to better serve the community. These are all just starting points, but they could really make a difference. And they're also not some bleeding heart wish list here. Most people, they believe you should hold police more accountable. They also want Joe Biden to do more, not less, than he's doing on the issue. But unfortunately, the extreme voices on both sides seem to be sucking the oxygen out of a debate that is trying to balance safety with fairness. Representative ILHAN OMAR, a Democrat from Minnesota, believes the answer is simple. Let's just defund the police.
The current infrastructure that exists as policing in our city should not exist anymore. And we can't go about creating a different process with the same infrastructure in place. And so dismantling it and then looking at what funding priorities should look like as we reimagine a new way forward is what needs to happen.
Dismantling to the police. And to the Congresswoman and the many who believe that the problem is simply the men and women in blue, I've got a few questions. Would you still be condemning the police if they never responded and more people were harmed or killed? Imagine for the moment back in Columbus, if the attacker were white and the victims of color, and if the police, instead of reacting, just watched as they were stabbed. Would police inaction then be condemned? And most importantly, what do all these incidents also have in common? People calling the police because they want to be safe. Civilians and small business owners, particularly in inner cities, have concerns of safety. And your simplistic removal of law and order makes for an easy soundbite, but it doesn't address a complicated problem. Worse yet, it allows the far right an escape hatch to avoid a national reckoning on unequal justice in America.
The rioting in some rare places is being stopped by police, and their aim is to fix that. They would like to eliminate all law enforcement for good.
Like hopefully all of you, I exhaled this week when the jury came back with guilty convictions across the board in Minneapolis. And listen, I never kidded myself that it cured America's original sin. But I did take notice that there was no blue wall that protected policing at its worst. I'm not one who thinks that cops' jobs are easy and that every day they all put on their uniforms to harass or worse. We need police and we need law and order. But it has to be fairer. In America today, views are hardened through which cable channel you watch and the shades of blue and red. If we keep letting the loudest voices with the most implausible agendas and the most concerted efforts to keep inequality, this debate will be right back to where we started from before what happened in Minneapolis. And to me, my friends, that will be yet another American tragedy. All right, when we come back, we will, as they say, follow the money. We're going to show you how President Biden is trying to even out the tax system by hiking taxes on the top 1%. After the break, you're going to meet somebody in the 1% who would get hit with a much higher tax bill. He says he supports it for the good of the country.